again with part 2 of our MDF room standards. In our part 1 video, we discussed the preparation steps for creating the MDF standards. In today's video, I'm going to go over a sample of a 10-foot by 10-foot square room that we've built and have used over several years now. So I hope you enjoy it. If you haven't seen the first video, I highly recommend that you do, because I'm hoping that you can understand a lot of the terminologies and items that we reviewed in the first video. So if you haven't watched it yet, I recommend that you do. Okay? All right, let's get started. So now that all the basics are out of the way in video 1, let me go over all the different areas of our standards. So this particular page here shows you the structural and electrical, plus some equipment. So let's start with the room dimensions. It's a 10 by 10 foot square room because it's designed to provide the maximum flexibility in terms of room orientation. In other words, you can flip this room around anywhere, right? Anyhow, to the right, to the left. It's designed to do that, and so that you don't actually have to update the standard as you do that, right? So all you do is flip it to the right, and then the door is on your left, and then flip it anywhere you want to, right? So that's the idea. The room itself is, as indicated in the first video, a small 10 by 10. And as you can see here in this design, it's really meant to house up to 3 racks / cabinets, or a combination of them. And the reason for that is really simple. It has to do with your service areas and clearance and safety, OSHA standards in the US and whatnot. Okay, so this is the page in where you get to see structural, electrical, and parts of the equipment. The room that you're looking at here is not a fire rated room. As I mentioned in the first video, in California and other states here in the US, rooms that have DAS, distributed antenna systems, need to comply with some regulations. And part of those regulations are building a 2-hour fire rated room. That sort of requirement encompasses a lot of things, right? The door has to be fire rated to 2 hours, and it's a special door. All the walls need to be fire rated to 2 hours, and they are built with slightly different equipment. The pathways or conduits into and out of the rooms need to be fire rated for 2 hours. Okay, so you need to know that, because you don't want to get to the end of the project and you've realized that you did not comply with the requirement. I think there's a lot of GCs they're aware of this, and they have the experience, the general contractors that is, and they will stop you, right? Because they're looking at the laws and building codes and all that, and they're going to stop you. But if you don't have to put in DAS equipment in these rooms, then you're building a standard 10 by 10 room, which doesn't have all the fire rating requirements. If you do have it, like I said, that's the first example, and the walls have to go all the way up to the ceiling of that floor or the building, because the ceiling of this room has to be rated to 2 hours as well in terms of fire. right? So let's go over the design, and we're gonna go over um, the part that makes the most sense right now, and that is rack layout and orientation. So in this design, we have 3 racks. These are your standard 19-inch racks without equipment. So the space that you see here in terms of service area in front, to the left, and on the back of the racks is plenty for a lot of standard IT equipment, including UPS systems and where they're long, or these servers that are also long. These are 2-post racks. You can design 4-post and cabinets. You will lose some of the service area space, but still be able to maintain adequate service area for safety and again for convenience. So 3 racks. Yes, you can fit one more. It would be tight and it would be hard and very difficult to get equipment to the back of the room as you walk in from the front of the room. Okay, so in video 1, I described SLAs, service level agreements. Again, I hope that you see that video first. And the reason I'm mentioning them now, the service level agreements, is that these rooms are built based on what you offer the business in terms of uptime. And this is an MDF room, not an IDF room, right? It's a main distribution frame. Typically, in today's industry standard designs, this room is used for distribution. They're not your typical IDF rooms where you could end up with a lot more equipment. And in some cases, we have designed, in fact, IDF rooms with this same dimension, 10 by 10, and the 19-inch racks were 2 meters long, high, so they accommodate a lot of equipment. But there is a small note here in the general notes, as you can see. The second phrase says, room not to exceed 20 watts per square foot. This doesn't apply in general. It applies to counties that make it mandatory for you to classify and build this room as a computer room if you exceed the 20 watts per square foot. I went over this detail in video 1, our first video of these 2 video series. So if you want more details, go back to that one. I really encourage you to watch that one first. All right, so now that we got the racks out of the way, as you can see here, you got wire management in between the racks. And from all of our experience, you're going to realize that you have about 3 inches of clearance between the wall and the first wire manager. You want that because it's hard to get around these wire managers if they're right against the wall. So you want that. You want to be able to have different size wire managers in between the racks. You can choose whatever standard you use for your wire managers. Today's wire management technologies are very flexible. This one on the right here happens to be a 4-inch wide, and it's as tall as the rack is. On the left of that, between rack 1 and 2, you have a 6-inch, and that's only because you have cables from rack number 1 and number 2 going through that wire manager right there in between racks 1 and 2. And then a standard one over here. If you choose to put a third rack slash cabinet, then we always suggested, but to match this one over here. Otherwise, you could have a 6-inch here too, and not a 4-inch wide. All right. So we reviewed racks and wire management. We reviewed service areas. Ladder racks are important, and in some cases, they're important because of seismic requirements, and where they further secure the racks, not just bolting them down to the floor of the room, but you're now also securing them at the top so that they don't vibrate. They do not move at all. And if they move with an earthquake, for example, we're based here in California, and we have them here, and we've had 7 point something earthquakes on a Richter scale, and the move of these cabinets slash racks is now diminished when you use these ladder racks. These ladder racks are a 1.5 foot, or actually they're 18 inches, right? 1.5 foot wide, and they're bolted to the walls. What I should have mentioned before, and I didn't, is obviously obvious to you now, but it is a top view of the room. We also, this is going to give you an opportunity to do a plug here, which is we provide design services, and in our design services we provide elevations in 3D setups of these standards. I'm not going to show you that today. We didn't build, we don't have those ready to show here. But if you're interested in our services for design, contact me directly. Contact us via our website. Okay? All right, going on to pathways. You're going to see 6 4-inch conduits, pathways. They're not in this, these are horizontal, not vertical. But so we did this to ensure that the GC was asking us and that he doesn't miss this item. So these are going horizontal as we indicated here. They're 4-inch wide, and we use them for distribution of structured cabling as well as structured cabling for APs. We separate the access points for wireless on a separate conduit because what we're seeing more and more now is that the structured cabling for APs is slightly different, both in color and thickness. So a fill rate for these 4-inch conduits with a Cat 6 is about 100 cables. We never go above 60%. In other words, never have more than 60 cables going through each of these 4-inch conduits. It's a nightmare and you want to avoid it. So center them, be sure you do that, to the ladder racks. And a room this size, you typically don't need for distribution, right? You don't need more than 4. 1, 2, 3, 4 for standard workstation structured cabling, and 2 for APs. 1, 2. You're distributing, these are going out of the room, right? Because of what we put into these racks right here. You're switching here, is over here. If you choose to use this one as an MDF NIDF combo. If it's an MDF, what we normally recommend is that you use this room as a distribution to other switches. So you end up using these conduits for fiber to other switches to IDF rooms, right? We also have these sleeves, and these, instead of horizontal, they're vertical. So these are shown properly. And in cases where you have rooms on top of rooms, in other words, you have a multi-floor, multi-level building, you want to build your rooms on top of each other. This is an MDF, so an IDF would be above. And then the other conduit that you see here is actually a feed from your minimum point of entry room. This is where your telco services are. And you bring them here and run them to your equipment here. So that is for pathways. We've talked about ladder racks already. Let's move on to ground. And in this particular case, MDF rooms don't get a lot of non-IT equipment. But when they do, you're going to have security systems off of this plywood, off the wall here on the left. And you're going to want to run from this ground bar, it's typically a 2-inch, at 14 inches above finished floor. You run it through the ladder rack and or cableway if you decide to separate them, and you run them to wherever you place the equipment on this plywood right here. Next, let's review power. And power, depending, going back to your SLA, your service level agreement with the business, you're going to want redundant power, and you're going to want to label that power properly and be sure that it's coming from the right place. We typically don't recommend putting your power box in this room. We don't recommend that. However, if you don't have a choice, what we do recommend is to have an electrical room next to this room, and where the circuit breakers and power box are in that room, and you extend the power to this. That's a better setup. But if you don't have that ability, either because of cost or complexity or your own standards or whatever reason, then the most obvious place to put this power box would be on the wall right here, in the back, on the north wall to the left, and probably a foot from this wall on the left. And that's for clearance purposes, and also when you have the electricians come in, they can distribute the power a little bit better to these racks. As you can see, we have overhead power via a wire mode off the ladder racks. We typically recommend installing them a foot or 6 inches, half a foot, above the ladder rack. So you have your ladder rack clearing the 2 meter or 1.8 meter racks or cabinets. They're right above that. And then you're also clearing the power. So you've got to be sure that if you put a UPS or a set of UPS systems in these racks, that typically they go to the bottom, that power cord from the UPS is going to reach way up here. Okay, so be sure that you get the extended power cords with those UPS systems. If you have a site UPS or a building UPS, which is not in this room, that's a different story. That again is a different design, and we've seen that, and we've actually built to that design. And where you don't place the UPSs in this room, you build a room that has the UPSs, or you put the UPSs in an electrical room and distribute the power from there. All right, so we've covered everything, and let me go over now briefly touched on this plywood right here, and that is typically a half-inch fire rated plywood that gets affixed, attached to this wall installed. That's typically a single sheet of 8 by 5 at 2 feet above finished floor. If you choose to go all the way down, you can. There's no need. You're not going to install equipment all the way down. You typically start even above 2 feet above finished floor. And so that's what we recommend. The regulations and rules of door swing are very common in the US. They are different in other countries and continents. But in the US, the door has to swing out for emergency exit. But there are some exceptions to that. So it's not a general rule. Okay? And in some cases, it can only swing up to a certain angle. And in other cases, in other states, it needs to swing all the way to the door level over here. To, if there's a wall on this side, it would have to be open to that level, to that angle. All right. So we touched on that. I'm going over my list here, folks. And so you've probably seen we talked about this in video 1 of your security requirements. And that is, you have a card key reader here and a network drop installed at 4 feet above finished floor. On the inside of that, we recommend another drop, a single drop, Cat 6, at the same height for an IP phone. And this, although is not always the case, in most cases, cell phone reception in these rooms is pretty bad. So if you have somebody working on an emergency or maintenance or whatever, that they need to be on the phone with a remote support team, you want to be sure that that phone, wall-mounted phone, has speakerphone and or a long cord, and where the person working on the problem can take the headset all the way to the back of the room if need to. So think about those things. They're very convenient. We always recommend that you do that. And the last item here in our list has to do with an item that's typically not as important, and that's the door. It's not important because doors are doors, right? But if you have signage on the door, make sure that it's not too obvious for security reasons, and you don't want to have a window on that door. If it's a fire-rated door, it's a little different. They're not going to allow you to put a window. There is no specific reason to have a window here. In fact, companies are against that, and we are against that too. The power type that we recommend here is going to vary on your needs. We always recommend for overhead power an L630 or 20, L520 or L630, depending on your equipment. But the L here is lockable, and the second number is amperage. The voltage will depend also on a combination of those, but typically an L630 is 220 volts, 30 amps, lockable, so that nobody, accidentally unplugs that plug that's from the UPS or whatever, right? That's up here. So that's really it. And so now I want to move on to HVAC. And temperature control. Same, obviously, same 10 by 10. What we often recommend, depending on your budget and your own standards, if you have them, is to have two types of cooling into this room. The primary should be your wall-mounted HVAC system. It's dedicated, it's controlling humidity at 42% plus or minus 5 points. You don't want to go beyond that. You don't want to have a room that's too dry or too humid. So humidity control is important for a lot of the IT equipment that you place in here. And having a backup system for humidity and temperature control is key as well. For humidity, not as much if you're going to have a house power, like house air, as we mentioned here. But the primary system in this case would be the dedicated, whatever tonnage you end up with, 1, 2, or 2.5 tons. You're not going to go over 2.5 tons because, especially on the wall-mounted unit, because what you're going to be dealing with is a floor-mounted unit if you go 3 over 2.5. There are some providers out there that are still providing 2.5 wall-mounted, but what they're learning is that because of some building regulations that, for example, seismic, they are not recommending going over 2.5 wall-mounted. And in fact, some providers have stopped building these larger systems that are wall-mounted. So your capacity of cooling will really be calculated depending on, obviously, the usage and what goes into this room. In other words, quantity / capacity is going to of equipment is going to determine how big or small you build these HVAC systems. If it's a normal MDF room, like I said before, that is used for distribution to other IDFs, then you're probably looking at no more than a 2-ton. You always have to remember too to add into the equation non-IT equipment that gets installed in this room. Always be sure to remember that because it has to be calculated into this. I'm going to do another plug here, and this again is a service we offer. We use a calculator that helps us. It's a proprietary calculator that we've built that you plug in all the equipment that's going into this room and give it anywhere from 10 to 15% up to 20% growth. And you plug in every single piece of equipment's requirements in terms of wattage, and it'll do cooling and wattage calculations for you. So in other words, we have the means of calculating everything. It's scientific, so we're going to get to that level. All right. In this particular standards, as you can see here, you have 2 by 2, vents, an intake and then an exhaust, right? Input and output that are your backup systems. Be sure, if you're going to design it this way, be sure to talk to your HVAC person to integrate them. You do not want both of these systems running at the same time. They will fight each other as to who's got control, and you'll end up with problems. So you want to avoid that. Okay? All right. So now that we've covered cooling and temperature requirements, let's jump over to lighting. So lighting, just as you saw 2x2 panels or exhaust and for cooling, we recommend, and I mentioned this in video 1, our first video describes the type of lighting that you want in these rooms and the location of them. are important as well. So we've included here a light switch to, as soon as you open the door, it makes more sense to put it on the right. This is an item that's going to change the locations depending this light switch right here. And that'll depend on your building code and regulations. Sometimes this switch gets put over here. Sometimes it is here. And so that will change locations. No big deal. What we recommend is to get a switch that has built-in motion sensor and that it is integrated with your lighting. You don't want to be sort of remembering to turn off like the lights, as it reduces the lifetime of these panels. But we recommend LED lighting panels, 2x2s, located exactly where they are now. And depending on how tall your ceiling is, you're going to end up with a very bright room. But you want to have them there because you're going to light the front and the back of your cabinets slash racks. Okay, 2 foot square. One of them, we always recommend that you have a battery backup. And you can talk to your electrician during a power outage, especially if the work and equipment in this room. You want to be sure that if there are failures of like a generator, for example, that you have a battery backup included in one of these light fixtures. You typically don't have to put it on both. That would be overkill, but again, it's up to you. And then the location of them is really ideal. And you typically don't need more than one. All right? All right, so we've hit the end of our video here. I hope you have enjoyed this content of this video. And please don't forget to hit like and subscribe. Thank you again for watching this video and have a good one. Bye.